Greetings, dear viewers. Today, I have prepared for you a story that will make your heart beat faster and immerse you in the world of high technology, space adventures, and of course, human emotions. We will embark on a journey with Lieutenant William Jones, a senior pilot in the U.S. Space Force, who finds himself at the heart of a conspiracy that threatens not only his career, but also his personal life. His story is a drama steeped in a struggle for the truth, love trials, and betrayal where he least expected it. Are you ready to immerse yourself in this world where every decision can be fatal and every twist of fate can change the future? Then get ready, incredible discoveries, and maybe even a battle in weightlessness are ahead of us. Don't forget, the full story is already waiting for you on our Patreon. Planetary Illusion. Chapter 1. Thursday, April 17th, USCG, Judge Advocate General's Building, Joint Base Grissom. I had just finished my coffee and looked at my watch. It had been a very long day, and I was anxious to get it over with. I had spent 3 hours testifying and answering questions before they put me in this tiny room with nothing but a television and my own thoughts to keep me company. I was asked to wait here until further notice, but that was over 2 hours ago. Surely, I thought, the board should have come to some conclusion by now. Suddenly the door opened, and my legal representative, Commander Tom Baker, entered the room. "The council just adjourned for the day, Lieutenant Jones," he said. "That's me, by the way. William Jones, Bill to my friends and family. I'm a senior flight lieutenant in the United States Space Corps, which used to be called the Space Force, and was formed almost 80 years ago. They want you back at 0800 tomorrow, so you'd better get back to your quarters," Commander Baker said. "And remember, don't socialize with any of the other witnesses in this case, especially your wife." "You mean the traitor known as my soon-to-be ex-wife, don't you, sir?" I asked. He nodded his head. "Yes, she is," he said. "Come on, Lieutenant, get out of here, and stay out of trouble." "Aye, sir," I said, standing up. I stretched out my legs, grabbed my case, and headed out the door. I got into my tiny electric car and then headed back to the BOQ. That's Bachelor Officer's Quarters, for those unfamiliar with the term. When I got to my room, I took off my uniform, grabbed a frozen faux meat hamburger, and threw it in the microwave. While it was cooking, I got a beer out of the refrigerator and uncorked the lid. When my hamburger was ready, I pulled it out and ate it in 3 big bites, trying not to notice the flavor. They were good for camping or a quick snack, but they were a poor substitute for the real thing, which was getting harder and harder to get. I sat down in my chair and turned on the TV to catch up on the latest news. There was nothing to catch my attention, so I leaned back in my chair and thought back over the past few weeks. Until recently, I was the weapons officer on the USS Armstrong, the Corps' newest, largest, fastest, and most advanced spacecraft. Named for the astronaut who first set foot on the moon in 1969, the Armstrong was considered the most advanced machine built by human hands. It seated 110 officers and crew members and was powered by 2 plasma-ion propulsion systems. It was claimed that Armstrong could reach Jupiter in less than 50 days. In addition, the Armstrong had enough firepower to destroy anything that threatened it. In addition to nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, it carried 3 pulse energy guns, a railgun, and several short-range mini-lasers that worked very much like the old miniguns of the early 21st century. In short, it was a cool ship. And my hand was controlling all that firepower. Why all this firepower, you may ask? About 45 years ago, one of our shuttles was attacked by an Iranian spacecraft. Unfortunately, the shuttle was unarmed and had no defenses. A missile fired by the Iranians hit the shuttle from below, destroying it. Outer space is the most inhospitable environment known to man, so everyone died instantly. We almost started a war because of this incident, but the diplomats somehow managed to avoid it. However, the Space Corps has decided that from now on, every manned spaceship in its fleet will be armored and equipped for combat. Receiving orders to serve on the Armstrong, making its maiden voyage to Jupiter, was made all the more gratifying by the fact that my wife of 5 years, Tabitha, or Tabby, as she liked to call herself, had also been ordered to the same ship. Unlike me, however, she would be serving as the ship's chief pilot. At first, I was beyond excited that we would be serving together on the newest ship in the fleet. It was the first time the two of us were assigned to the same ship at the same time. We were high school sweethearts who vowed to be exclusive to each other shortly after we turned 18. We both wanted to fly into space and applied to the academy our senior year of high school. We were both accepted and got engaged right out of high school, planning to get married after graduating from the academy. She got her wish and became a pilot. I did not become a pilot and was assigned to operations and weapons. I was discouraged by this at first, but the more I got to shoot and blow things up, the more I enjoyed it. After graduating from the academy, we were married, each in our dress uniforms. We were assigned to the same base, but unfortunately, our missions often kept us apart. It's hard when one spouse is constantly going into space for 2 months or so, but it's even worse when both are doing the same thing. Sometimes she would go on a mission for 2 months, leaving me to wait at home. Other times, I would go on a mission. Sometimes we both left at the same time, but for different missions. Needless to say, we didn't get to spend much time together, so we made the most of the time we had. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't just sitting at home twiddling my thumbs while she was away. I became interested in a fairly new type of martial arts called gravtac, which was designed specifically for low to medium pressure environments. I had practiced martial arts in middle school and was immediately attracted to it. It required strength, tactical thinking, and knowledge of how objects react in a low-gravity environment. In all this time, I never even considered the possibility that Tabby might cheat on me. I always believed that she would do the right thing, so I never worried about it. Although I was tempted at times, I decided that I would never cheat on the woman I loved. So the thought that she might be seeing someone behind my back never even crossed my mind. I remembered how we used to fantasize about doing it in zero gravity, on the moon or Mars. We always said that if the opportunity presented itself, we would definitely try it, at least once. So naturally, when we both received orders to serve on the Armstrong, it was like a dream come true for both of us. Unfortunately, that dream turned into a nightmare, from which there was no way out. My thoughts went back to the day I left. Friday, Jan. 3. Canaveral Launch Complex, Florida. Donning my spacesuit and launch kit, I said nothing as the technicians put me in the seat of the passenger shuttle that would take me and 20 others to the orbital dock where the Armstrong was located. As chief pilot, Tabby went up in the first shuttle, which had launched a little over 3 hours ago. I was in the third shuttle to lift off that day. 3 more would follow. Sitting next to me was the Armstrong's first officer, Commander Jason Travers, or Bull, as he was called because of his size and general demeanor. I knew Bull from back at the academy. He'd been an instructor there when Tabby and I were in school, and back then he was a hard ass who didn't put up with anyone's crap. He expected students to give 110% and wouldn't settle for less. He was also Tubby's counselor at the time. I attended a few of his classes, but other than that, I had little contact with him. So Jones, can't wait to finally serve with your wife? Asked Bull. Yes, sir, it is, I said. Well, this will go down in history, he said. I hear we're going farther than anyone before us, I told him. Jupiter and back in less than 100 days, he said. It's going to be a very interesting mission. I could feel and hear the pumps working beneath us in the rocket that would eventually lift us into the sky, and I knew we would be leaving Earth very soon. Bull knew it too, as did everyone else in the shuttle. We were all veterans of spaceflight, so this was nothing new to us. Bull looked around to make sure everyone was ready to go. So, everyone say goodbye to Earth. That's it, so get over it, he growled before resting his head back on the seat cushion. We closed our visors and got ready to launch. We felt the car shake as the engine started, and then felt the immense force of gravity as the rocket began to lift off. Looking out the window, I could see the clouds rushing past as we rose into the sky. Soon the blue sky blackened, and I could make out the curvature of the planet below. I never tired of looking at it. The shuttle shuddered as the boosters disengaged. I knew they would fall back to Earth and land near where we took off from so they could be used again. About an hour later, I saw a structure in the distance. There she is, Bull said, opening the visor. We'll be docking soon. Half an hour later, the shuttle approached the large open dock and matched its speed to that of the dock. 2 large tubular structures emerged from it and made contact with the shuttle. A hiss of air was heard as the pressure in the dock stabilized. That's it, Bull said. "Get ready to experience some gravity. Right now, the ship should be at a pressure of 0.8 G." I knew from the orientation documents that the Armstrong was equipped with a gravity system that could be adjusted as needed. This would help alleviate the effects of prolonged weightlessness, which included fluid shifts, muscle atrophy, and bone loss. We waited for the crew to signal, and soon a green light flashed over the hatches. Bull unbuckled his harness and stood up, ordering the others to follow suit. After he stepped into the aisle, I unbuckled my harness and stood up, grabbing my bag. It was strange going from the near-zero gravity of the shuttle to the somewhat reduced but present gravity of the ship. Within a few steps, I felt the weight of my backpack and bag. "Station launch in 4 hours, people," Bull called out as we entered the ship. "Let's get going. There are 3 more shuttles right behind us." I already knew where our cabin was from the orientation materials, so the first thing I did was head there, hoping to see Tabby. Unfortunately, she wasn't there, but I could tell she was already in the cabin because her things took up half the space in our tiny closet. I put away my gear, took off my heavy spacesuit, and put on my normal flight suit. Grabbing my black uniform cap, I went to the bridge to take my place at the weapons console. I had a lot of work to do before we could launch. When I got there, the bridge was bustling with activity. Tabby was working on the pre-flight checklist, so I left her alone. I fired up the console and ran the calibration routines, then took a printout of the weapons inventory. I then walked over to the 2 cruise missile platforms, physically checked the serial numbers on the list, and made sure the locks were in place. I then walked over to each of the weapon stations and verified that they were locked and ready for immediate use. I then returned to the bridge to report to the captain on my supplies. I had to wait for the medic to finish his report before I could submit my inventory, but I was fine with that. When the doc left, the captain looked at me. I recognized him immediately, Captain Alan Simmons. "Lieutenant Jones," he said, taking my inventory sheet. "As I recall, we served on the Shepherd." "Yes, sir, we did," I said. He signed the inventory, and we checked our key numbers. Only 3 people had keys to the cruise missiles. Me, the captain, and the first officer. 2 of those 3 keys were required to launch the missiles. "Good to have you with us, Jones," he said. "I understand you and our chief pilot are married." Tabby turned and smiled upon hearing this. "Yes, sir, it is," I told him. "Good," Alan said. "It will help make the trip more exciting for you." "Yes, sir, I hope so," I said, looking at Tabby. She gave me a mischievous smile and then went back to her business. By then, Bull had reached the bridge and was strutting around, checking to make sure everything was in place. Bull threw me a look that could freeze a solar flare, and I took it as a hint that it was time to return to my post. "I'd better get back to my station, sir." Alan nodded his head and turned to the next person demanding his attention. I returned to my station and verified that all calibration tasks had been completed. From my point of view, everything was locked down and in perfect order. I knew from my time on the Shepherd that Captain Simmons liked to do impromptu weapons drills and target practice from time to time, so it was important that I was ready to lock and load weapons at a moment's notice. It was also critical that the targeting system always remain calibrated. As a rule, once calibrated, the system remained, so unless there was a serious malfunction or someone interfered with its operation. Nevertheless, each shift began with a calibration check. Finally, Alan began a pre-launch check of each station while we all buckled into our seats. "Operative," he called out. "All systems are ready for launch," replied Lieutenant CMDR Alice Brewster, operations officer and my immediate supervisor. "Engineering," Alan called out. "All systems are normal and within normal parameters. Proceed to launch, sir," said Chief Engineer Lieutenant CM Dictor Brian Faulkner. "Guns. All systems calibrated and locked down, sir. All weapons accounted for," I said. "Com. Communications 5x5, sir," said Senior Communications Officer Lieutenant CMDR Denise Simpson. "Navigation. Course plotted and locked, sir. Estimated time of arrival at Mars Station is 440 hours, reported the Chief Navigation Officer, Lieutenant Ryan Halcombe, whose console was next to Tabby's at the front of the bridge. "Number 1. All personnel in place and accounted for, sir. All stations report ready for launch, Bull said from his station just behind, and to Alan's left. Alan nodded his head and pressed a button on the console in front of him. Houston, this is Armstrong. Request permission to launch. Launch authorization granted, Armstrong. Godspeed, came a voice from the communication speaker overhead. Alan nodded his head and pressed the button on the console again. Roger that, Houston, he said. He pressed another button and spoke again. Spaddock, this is Armstrong. Launch authorization has been received. Shut down and retract all lines. Copy that, Armstrong. The lines are retracting. We heard a few sharp sounds and realized it was the lines retracting. From that point on, we were on our own energy. A few moments later, we heard confirmation that all lines were fully retracted and the ship could move forward. Start the engines, Alan ordered. Engines are running, Brian said. Take us out, helmsman. Nice and easy. Don't scratch the paint, Alan said with a smile. Aye, sir, Tabby said, pushing two levers and holding the control column. The ship slowly began to move forward, and I could see the exit from the spaceport getting closer. I knew we were only running on maneuvering thrusters at this point. Firing the ion fusion plasma engines inside the space dock would do serious damage to both the dock and Armstrong. Soon we were away from the big structure. The space dock is ready, Tabby said. From here, we'll spiral out of Earth orbit to a point between the Earth and the Moon, where we'll fire the two big engines. Q-Spot, it was called, and I could see the tracking on the navigator's console from where I sat. An hour later, the navigator spoke. ETA to Q-Point is 2 microns, sir, Ryan said. The road is clear. That meant the forward sensors had detected no debris or organic material, such as rocks, in our path that could damage the ship. Copy that, Alan said. Engineering. Engines warmed up and ready, sir, Brian said. Alan pressed a button on his console. Houston, Armstrong. Approaching point Q. Approaching Q point. Copy that, Armstrong. We all watched the countdown timers on our consoles and got ready. When the timer reached 0 o'clock, Alan spoke again. Pump up the tires and light a fire, helmsman. Let's see what this girl can do. Tabby's hands fluttered over the console as she answered. Kicking tires. Starting fires. Aye, sir, she said. She slid the control levers all the way forward, and we all felt the initial force as the ion fusion plasma engines opened. We heard a faint hum as the engines increased speed, and we felt the G-force increase. I realized that at that moment, we were flying through space faster than a human had ever flown. I looked at Tabby, feeling a sense of pride in the way she handled herself. And this huge vessel. She looked back at me, and I smiled, winked, and gave her a thumbs up. She smiled back. Glancing at Bull, I thought he was about to explode, so I turned back to my console. About an hour later, I got my first clue that all was not going to be well on this voyage when Bull posted the officer's schedule on the bridge. I wasn't surprised that he posted the schedule. Usually the first mate did that, but I was surprised to see that I had been put on the second shift. You must realize that there is no such thing as night or day in space. Our chronometers, as on all other core ships, are synchronized with the chronometers in Houston. When night falls in Houston, the lights on the ship are dimmed significantly to give the crew a sense that night has fallen. This usually happens during the second shift. Core bridge officers typically work 12-hour shifts. Thus, there are 2 shifts, first shift and second shift. The Corps has a long tradition of putting the senior bridge officers on the first shift and the less experienced and lower-ranked officers on the second shift. This is not written down in any way, and the first officer has quite a bit of leeway in this matter. But it still hurt to see Bull put me on the second shift. It was almost like a demotion. Worse, it meant that Tabby and I would have almost no time together, since she'd be working the first shift. If I was lucky, we'd be able to see each other for a few minutes during my shift. To say I was pissed off was an understatement. And Bull knew it. "Is there a scheduling problem, Lieutenant?" I heard Bull ask. I looked up and saw him in front of my console. By this time, Alice had walked over to me. Apparently she had seen the schedule too, and was as interested as I was in hearing his explanation. "Am I still the senior weapons officer, sir?" I asked. "Of course, yes," Bull said. "Then why am I working second shift?" "Because, in my opinion, this is the best place for you," he said, his voice beginning to draw attention. Look, Lieutenant, if you have a scheduling problem, work it out with the captain, through me. By this time, Alan had approached my console. Is there a problem, gentlemen? He asked. Lieutenant Jones doesn't seem to like the bridge schedule, sir, Bull said. Alan looked at the schedule and frowned as he read it. I understand how he might feel, number one, Alan said. It's very unusual, don't you agree? Yes, sir. Under normal circumstances, I would, Bull said. I simply believe that Lieutenant Jones' knowledge and experience is best utilized on the second shift. And I believe it will give us an opportunity to train some of the other gunnery officers, to give them experience on the bridge on the first shift. My bullshit detectors went off just at that moment. I couldn't believe the crap he was spewing at the captain. Is that the only reason, Commander, or is there something else? Asked Alan. Apparently, he didn't believe it either. If I may, sir, I will speak freely, Bull said quietly. Always number one, Alan said. I've never been a big fan of spouses working on the same ship, especially in such close quarters. I don't want either of them distracted from their duties. That's what I thought, Alan said. I understand how you feel, but I'm not going to let this tour affect their morale. Make sure they spend time with each other, do you hear me? Yes, sir, Bull said. Alan looked at me before he spoke. Can you do that, Lieutenant? He asked. Yes, sir, I said. He nodded his head. Good. Carry on, all of you, he said, before walking away. Bull stared after me for a moment, and then a smirk appeared on his face. Don't worry, Jones. I'll keep an eye on your wife, he said before walking away. I looked at Alice and was about to say something, but she put her finger to her lips. Don't say anything, Bill, she said. We'll talk later. Go ahead. I'll call Lieutenant Robinson. Yes, ma'am, I said quietly. I glanced over at Tabby and noticed that she was trying to focus on some place on her console. I could see that her face was flushed, but I wasn't sure if it was from embarrassment or guilt. I turned and walked off the bridge, feeling more embarrassed and humiliated than I ever had on the ship. Something about it stank to high heaven. I headed to the galley, hoping to get something to eat. It wasn't the usual mealtime, and I knew they wouldn't have anything special, but I needed something in my stomach. Not much in stock right now, Lieutenant, said the man behind the plexiglass partition. All we have are hamburgers made of artificial meat. They taste like crap, but they're guaranteed to fill you up. Sorry. That's enough for now, I said. I'll take one. He took one and put it on my tray. He held out a small package of flavored ketchup. Would you like some axle grease to make it more palatable? He asked with a smile. Sure, why not, I said, taking the package. Thanks. Anytime, Lieutenant, he said. I grabbed a small bottle of chocolate milk and headed to a vacant table. I ate the burger, slathering the flatbread with ketchup and gulping down the milk. The commander was right. It tasted like shit, but I was full, and the ketchup made it taste a little better. I put the tray away, tossed the trash in the container, and headed for my quarters. I lay down on my shelf and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I wondered what Bull was really up to. What did he mean about looking after Tubby? I tossed and turned for about an hour, but I couldn't settle down. Frustrated, I finally got up and put on my workout clothes, a t-shirt and shorts. I put on my shoes and socks and headed for the small gym on one of the lower decks. When I got there, I was relieved to see that I was alone. Good, I thought. It would give me a chance to vent my frustration without talking to anyone, which I didn't think I could do without getting angry. I did some stretching, then did a little workout on the treadmill and the weight machine. Then I went to the gravity regulator on the wall and reduced the gravity in the room to 0.4 G. I immediately felt the difference. I then spent the next half hour practicing some of the GravTac techniques I had learned before leaving Earth. By then, I had worked up a good sweat and felt like I could finally fall asleep. I put the gravity back where it should be and went back to my quarters. I showered in the tiny room, set my alarm clock, and lay back down. I fell asleep in the blink of an eye. When the alarm rang, I got up, showered, shaved, put on my uniform, and headed to the galley for a snack. It was a hell of a lot better than the faux meat burger I'd had before. I got to the bridge just as Tabby was leaving. "Hello, stranger," I said when I saw her. She looked at me and smiled. "Hi," she said. "Look, I didn't get a chance to tell you, but I thought you did a hell of a job with the launch," I said. "Thank you," she said to me. "Look, maybe I'll come over on my lunch break and we can spend some time together," I said. I could see the wheels turning in her head and thought she was going to make me an excuse as to why it wouldn't work. Thankfully, it didn't. "Sure, I'll set the alarm," she said. "Maybe you can eat something else with me instead of one of those fake burgers." "Works for me," I said. "I'll see you in 6 hours." "I'll be there," she said, and gave me a quick kiss. "I love you." "I love you too," I told her. I watched her walk away and thought that maybe we could make it work. I turned around and saw Bull's grinning face. "About damn time you showed up, Jones," he said. I looked at my watch. "My shift doesn't officially start for another 15 minutes, Commander," I said. "I just wanted to talk to my wife before going on duty. If that's okay with you, sir." For a moment, I thought he was going to lash out at me, but he calmed down. "Yeah, all right," he said, and went further down the corridor. I went onto the bridge and took over for Lieutenant Robinson. He handed me my shift and walked out. Alice came up to me as I began the calibration procedure. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'll be fine, ma'am," I said. "Drop the ma'am thing, Bill," she said. "We've worked together before. Seriously. How are you holding up?" "It's not easy, but I can handle it, Alice. Thanks for asking." "You're welcome. Look, I know you have a lot on your mind, but I think you need to look after your wife and Commander Travers." I looked at her, shocked. "Do you think there's something going on between them?" I asked. "Maybe. Call it female intuition if you want, Bill. I just have a feeling there's something going on out there. I've seen it before. Little glances here and there, that sort of thing. Nothing overt, but there's definitely a spark between these two," she said. "Got it, Alice. Thanks for letting me know. I plan to meet with her on my lunch break. Hope that helps," I said. "I hope so too, Bill," she said. "Should we tell the captain?" I asked her. She shook her head. "Not unless you have solid evidence against them. Such an accusation against a senior officer can backfire and severely damage your career," she said. "Just stay alert and try to keep your wife alert. I'll keep an eye on things during the first shift." "Okay, Alice," I said. "Thanks for the heads up." She nodded her head and left the bridge. I checked the calibration procedure and went to inventory the cruise missiles and inspect the weapons stations. When I returned, Alan was already waiting for me. "Would you like to practice target shooting?" he asked. "Shit, I'm always up for target practice," I thought to myself. "Yes, sir," I told him. "All right," he said. "Launch a few drones and let's see what you've got." I set the station to launch a series of 5 drones, then activated the short-range mini-lasers. They acted much like the old miniguns. A series of 6 powerful and very hot lasers were set up just like the old Gatling guns. The laser fire from these weapons was very intense and could burn through several inches of armor in the blink of an eye. I once saw them cut an old armored battleship in 2. The belt armor on it was over 12 inches thick, but the lasers cut through it like a hot knife through butter. Once the drones were launched, I aimed the mini lasers at them. The system was designed to track and fire on up to 10 targets at a time. It only took a second or two for the lasers to destroy the drones. I glanced at my console and saw the message, "All targets destroyed." "Well done, Lieutenant," Alan said with a smile. "Thank you, sir," I replied. He got up from his chair and walked over to my desk. "I'm going to get some rest, Lieutenant. It looks like you'll be the senior officer on watch, so why don't you take the center chair? I'll be back just in time for your lunch break," he said with a knowing smile. Having served with Alan before, I knew him as the king of power naps. He was one of those people who could stay awake for almost 24 hours with only 3 or 4 hours of sleep. I assumed that came with years of command experience. "Yes, sir, thank you," I said in reply. He left the bridge and I took his seat. It felt good to be sitting in the commander's chair. From here, I could keep an eye on everything that was happening on the ship. And then it hit me. Each crew member wore a device on their wrist that not only told time and served as an alarm clock, but also served as a communicator, a tracking device, and monitored our vital signs. All crew members were required to wear the device at all times. The only time we were allowed to take it off was when we showered. I turned on the tracking monitor on the command console and looked for Travers. The monitor showed that he was in his quarters. More accurately, the monitor showed that the tracker was in his quarters. When I looked a little deeper, I noticed that he was in a deep sleep, and his pulse rate was normal for someone in that state. That could only happen if he was actually wearing the thing. I looked for Jones and was given 2 choices: William, me, and Tabitha. I chose Tabitha and saw that her beacon was in our quarters. Good. Like Bull, her tracker showed she was asleep, and her vitals were normal for someone in that condition. I thought about accessing the history of both trackers, but realized I'd need a command or medical password to do so. Since I had neither, I couldn't tell if the 2 of them were engaged in other, more strenuous activities. But what I saw was enough, I thought. It would be very difficult for the 2 of them to fake something like that, so I turned off the tracking monitor and went about my business. I looked around the bridge. Everyone was busy at their stations and working hard. It was like I wasn't even here. I went back to my console and reviewed the checklist. So far, everything was working within normal limits. We were due for a course correction in about an hour, but I knew it was already programmed into the navigation system and would be done automatically. The communications officer on watch was in constant communication with someone in flight control in Houston, and I knew I wouldn't have to get involved unless a situation arose that required the captain's immediate attention. The engineer on duty was keeping a close eye on the condition of the engines and the ship's vital systems. The helmsman and navigator closely monitored the ship's flight, making sure that the upcoming course correction would go smoothly. I made the necessary log entries for the hour and walked over to the weapons console to make a quick check. Everything seemed to be in order, so I walked back to the center chair and sat down. About 2 hours after the shift started, Petty Officer Marks went around to all the posts, collecting drink orders for everyone. We were allowed to drink in our seats, but on the condition that they were covered and straws were used. She left and returned a little while later from the galley, handing out drinks to everyone. A few minutes before I was due to start lunch, Alan returned, and I yielded the big chair to him, briefly recounting the events that had taken place so far. He nodded his head, taking a seat and making an entry in his journal. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he said. "Why don't you go take your lunch break?" he added with a slight wink. "Yes, sir," I said as I walked out of my office. I headed towards the quarters that Tabby and I shared and stopped right in front of the open hatch. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. She had just woken up. Her alarm clock had gone off. She pulled back the covers, and I saw something interesting. God, she's so beautiful, I thought, striding toward her. She looked so good. "Are you ready for dinner?" she asked defiantly. I smiled and sat down on the bed with her. "You know I do," I said. This is where the little scene I had to cut. "God, that was so good," she said. "I really needed that." "Me too," I told her. "I missed you." "And I missed you too. I love you so much." "I love you too," I replied. "You'd better get cleaned up and get on the road," she said. "You haven't even eaten yet." I looked at the time and saw that it was about 40 minutes until the end of the break. "Yeah, you're right," I said. "Do you want to do it again, maybe on your lunch break?" "Sure, why not?" she said with a smile. Feeling a little better, I got out of bed, took a quick shower, and headed for the galley. Before leaving the cabin, I kissed her, then dimmed the lights and lowered the gravity level in the room to 0.7 Gs. I knew the only reason I could perform was because of my knowledge of GravTach, and I knew Bull wasn't familiar with it. Keep in mind that this business in space is a tricky business. Forget what you've seen in the movies. For starters, microgravity makes the blood rush to your head. Luckily, the gravity on the ship was set to 0.8 G by default, which barely allowed us to enjoy the moment. But it still wasn't easy. I had no doubt that if gravity had been set lower than it was now, we probably wouldn't have been able to do what we did. Another problem is that testosterone levels drop in microgravity, and over a long period of time, the heart can shrink, reducing the volume of blood in the circulatory system. These are just some of the reasons why NASA opposed sending couples into space a century ago. Another reason has to do with complications during pregnancy and childbirth. Nevertheless, there have been many stories over the years involving couples in orbit. I remember reading about a cosmonaut who spent 14 months on the Russian Mir station in the 1990s. According to the story, he got close to a female cosmonaut, which led some to think they were doing dirty deeds in orbit. Kremlin officials denied the allegations, and the cosmonaut wrote about it later. We don't need to say what we crave. Men think of these things. It's impossible to dismiss them. But with time, these thoughts somehow subside, he wrote. He also revealed that his superiors suggested he take a doll with him, but he feared he might get too attached to the toy. Many of the limitations of the old space administration were carried over when the Corps began sending humans into orbit. But the development of artificial gravity in the early 2090s made many of those restrictions moot. So the Corps backed off a bit and allowed married couples to have relationships in space, provided some form of birth control was used, and the gravity level was set at 0.8. I felt much better as I ate my tuna sandwich and headed back to the bridge. When I got there, I still had 2 minutes left before the break. Alan looked at me as I took my seat. "Did you have a good lunch, Lieutenant?" he asked. "Yes, sir, a very good lunch," I told him. He smiled and nodded his head. "Good, carry on," he said, turning back to his console. The next 17 days went pretty much the same way. Tabby came to our cabin several times during our lunch break, and of course I joined her on my lunch breaks at every opportunity. Being able to see each other at least part of the time helped me get through this part of the trip. I didn't see much of Bull during this time, and that helped too. Of course, I still had some concerns, but I hadn't seen or heard anything to suggest that anything suspicious was going on. Alice kept me informed, but said she hadn't seen or heard anything either. When we got to Mars Station, I began to think I might have made a big deal out of it. After the Armstrong docked with Mars Station, I put on my Class C uniform in anticipation of a shore leave with Tabby. But my hopes of spending time with her at Huygens Base, a domed structure named after the Dutch astronomer who drew pictures of the red planet with a telescope of his own design, were dashed when Bull informed me that there was a problem with one or more of the weapon stations. "What?" I asked, shocked. The last time I had checked them, which had been only a few hours earlier, during my shift, there had been no problems with them. I looked at Lieutenant Robinson. "Were you aware of any problems?" I asked him. He shook his head. "Just before the dock, sir," he told me. There was something very suspicious about it, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. "We're only here for 72 hours, Bull said. "And by the time we launch, these weapons should be ready to go, so you'd better get on it, Jones." I looked at Tubby and shook my head. "It will be all right, dear," she said with a sad expression on her face. "We'll still have a chance to visit Huygens together. I'll bring you a souvenir, okay?" Bull grinned. "Don't worry, Jones. I'll look after your wife." "I promise," he said. "Yeah, I'm sure he will. The creep," I thought. At that moment, Alan came up to us. "So, are you ready for a little rest on the beach?" he asked. "Yes," Bull said. "But Jones needs to take a look at the weapons systems." "Is there a problem?" asked Alan. "Calibration of the 2 mini-lasers has been disrupted, sir," Robinson said. "When did this happen?" asked Alan. "I spotted him before I secured the station, sir," Robinson said. Alan frowned and looked at me. "Then you'd better take a look, Lieutenant," he said. "I'll look at them with you if you don't mind." "Not at all, sir," I said, glancing at Bull. "I appreciate that." "I'll stay and help, Lieutenant," Robinson said. "Thanks, Robinson. I appreciate it," I said. "Well, I guess we'd better get to the station before all the shuttles leave," Bull said. Tabby looked at me sadly, but didn't say anything. "Do it, number 1," Alan said. Bull and Tabby turned and walked away. I couldn't help but notice that she never told me that she loved me, or that I would see her later. I turned and looked at Alice. "It stinks to high heaven, Bill," she said to me quietly. "I'll keep an eye on them there." "Thank you," I said. She smiled and patted my hand before walking away. "Well, I guess I'd better change into my work clothes," I said. "What lasers have you had trouble with?" "Number 2 and number 5, sir," Robinson said. "Okay, I'll take number 2 if you can check 5. But we'll need to check them all," I said. "On my way, sir," Robinson said. I turned to leave and saw Alan looking at the door through which Bull and Tubby had exited earlier. I could see the wheels turning in his head. "I'll change and meet you at Laser Station 2, if that's okay with you, sir," I said. "I'll meet you there in a few minutes," he said. I grabbed my tool bag and left the bridge. I had been at the station for a few minutes when Alan came crawling up beside me. I noticed that he had changed back into his work uniform. Part 1 of our story has finally come to an end, leaving behind more questions than answers. Lieutenant William Jones, our protagonist, faced betrayal where he least expected it, in the heart of his own marriage. But are things really so unambiguous? We see the interactions between the characters begin to reveal deep psychological layers where betrayal, trust, and duty are intertwined into a complex pattern of human relationships. With each step in the story, William faces not only challenges in the professional realm, but also personal dilemmas. His inner world is a struggle between duty and feelings, between disappointment and hope. As he makes decisions, he inevitably faces consequences that could change his life forever. His wife's betrayal, which seemed obvious to him, may actually be a misunderstanding or the result of external pressure. Or could it really be that everything is as it seems at first glance? This is a question to be answered in the next parts of our story. We see how important communication is between spouses, especially when both are crew members of a spaceship. Their relationship is not only a personal space for each of them, but also an important element in the successful accomplishment of the mission. This story reminds us of the complexity of human relationships and how easy it is to make the mistake of jumping to conclusions without a full picture of what is going on. As we prepare for the next part of the story, we leave William and Tabitha on the cusp of changes that could determine their future. How will they handle the challenges that are coming at them? Will William be able to unravel the mystery of betrayal and regain his lost trust? To find out what awaits our heroes next, join us on Patreon, where the full story is already available. Don't miss the chance to immerse yourself in this thrilling story to the end, unraveling the mysteries of the human psyche and exploring the depths of space with our heroes.